So everyone, thank you very much. At this point, we will be transitioning from the formal Q&A session to the more informal, no holds barred section of our Q&A. So we invite you at this point to unmute yourselves if you'd like to participate, or if you'd like to go outside and enjoy the nice weather, you're welcome to do that. But if you'd like to stay on, please go ahead and pepper Lisa with all the questions you've ever had about train wrecks and how to survive one.
Go ahead, Kathy.
Can I just tell one story of a train wreck that I didn't put in my thing? Years ago, I was at Massey Hall for a Messiah. This was back when Elmer Eisler was still the conductor of the Mendelssohn Choir. So big choir, like 100 people, something like that. So they're doing the Christmas parts of the Messiah. And right in the middle, right in the middle of one of the choruses, a guy in the back row falls over. I don't know what happened to the poor man. Maybe he was hot and he fainted or something. So Elmer Eisler, I will never forget this. Elmer Eisler, who was a kind of a bit of a crazy man, wonderful but crazy. He was on like a podium that had a few steps to it. So he literally just went down the steps so that he was then standing on the stage, and he still had his back to the audience, and he just stood there. And a couple of people carried this guy out, like one on each end, carried him out. The two guys came back, went to their spots. Elmer Eisler back onto the podium, arms up, and started the whole that movement again. And as if this was a regular occurrence and that this had never, it was truly amazing. Anyways, I'd never forgotten it. I just wanted to tell you.
Can't rehearse that.
Was that actually during the performance of the piece itself?
During the performance, it was in one of the choruses.
So he was conducting and then kind of stopped.
Yeah, just stopped everybody.
Everyone stop. Let's let this man who's fainted be carried off stage, and then he just kind of waited and then started again.
Yep.
That's fantastic.
No fuss. He didn't even turn to the audience. Nothing. He just stood there.
Kathy, what's your question?
Well, it's more a comment of how a train wreck can attach itself to a piece and stress everybody out. So we have a favorite piece in our choir that small groups play, a quartet for Silent Night, often on Christmas Eve, but usually at least once in Advent. And we played it for several times through very successfully with Debbie Lloyd, who passed away a few years ago. So we had to recreate a group of people to play that, and she played the most difficult part. So we put together a group of 4. I wasn't in it at that time because I had been unwell, so I had been on a leave. And I was in the audience, and the only person who knew how badly Silent Night could go, so it doesn't even sound like Silent Night. It completely fell apart. And yet there were octave paired sections where at least if somebody had listened to somebody else, the bass was playing it and the upper bells were playing it. So when we recreated a choir with a new ringer who didn't luckily have the history, didn't know about it all, we practiced getting back in. So we would have, it's a traveling piece where you go up and down and you've got chaos for things being out of place, but you also can't always find where you are because you jump from one copy down 5 steps to the other copy. So we had each ringer practice closing her eyes and stopping for 10, 15 bars and jumping back in different places at different times in the rehearsal, because we were all so stressed that it would happen again that we had to hear where we were, because when you get lost on a piece with 7 pages and you're jumping around, you can't always figure out where to get back in. We had to hear our part. So I would encourage anybody and that's the thing with a small group, you can learn it really well. So we got ourselves through the psych hold it had on us that this piece is going to go off the rails because it did before, but it went beautifully. But yeah, we had to practice it going off the rails by stopping.
Yeah. I would say that actually there is a lot of value in being prepared for train wrecks. I'm often ringing in either the bass or the upper trebles, and I have more than just a couple of bells to manage. And I often am rearranging my bells, especially in the bass. I kind of put bells out of order to make my transitions more easier. Or if I'm in the treble, then I have different sets of clusters that I've set up. And sometimes knowing that a page turn is really difficult and that I'm liable to turn 2 pages or just not be able to turn the page at all, I'll actually write, I'll have little tiny note charts at the beginning, at the top of every page. And then even at the bottom, just before a page turn, I'll write a note chart, just if there's a change on the next page. So that way I'm prepared that if I can't turn the page, I still at least know what bells I need to have in my hands. And I can look one stand over and read that piece of music and at least get the notes, but then still have the right set of bells in my hands, which is kind of, I know it sounds as though you're preparing for the worst, but it's better to be prepared and not need it than to be caught completely unawares and suffer the consequences.
Yeah, I said that in my one of my tutorials, that idea of writing on the bottom of the page what comes next, what you need.
Okay, here's another lovely little story. And Lynn, I'm going to hang you out with this one because we did this together. At one of the Bells in Spring things we were doing, I believe it was Amazing Grace, entering with singing bells. And we were both with singing bells. And by the time we were getting up to where our music stand was, it was, did you turn the page back? No, did you? No. Oh, well, you kind of know what goes on. So, and we were both so familiar with the piece that we could do it, but coming in and seeing the music on the wrong page, thinking, we both have two hands in motion. We can't do a bloody thing about that, and nobody's close enough. So, good fake. That's
because you are well prepared.
And I find I'm often reading off my neighbors' stands. So I'm counting on them to turn their page. So if I miss my page turn and my neighbor has knocked their music stand on the ground, then we are all in trouble.
Yes, very true. And
Anybody else have something?
Sorry, Mark?
Anybody else have something to ask Lisa?
I have a quick question. The tutorial was great, by the way, and lots of good ideas. But how do you tamp down the panic that overrides everything?
You don't. You just let it take over.
Intellectually, what you should be doing at that point, but I get overridden with panic.
Oh, you just let it wash over you, and then once you've accepted that the panic is there, then you can kind of address it. That's how I deal with it. I don't know about Lisa.
I think you do have to, I think it's okay to panic, but the outward has to look like you're not panicking. And
as
so
you know,
if you're panicking, then, and sometimes we just, as human beings, we can't help that. I don't know. I think for me, it's always just been understanding that you're just going to make mistakes and trying to forgive yourself. I think it's a lot, and we musicians are the worst at this, right? Like, our audience members are so forgiving, and we are so, I could perform a whole song and miss one note and be so mad at myself because I missed that one note, even though I could play beautifully or sung beautifully for the rest of the song. But we have to really practice forgiveness and practice kind of letting ourselves off the hook.
That reminds me of something else too, that you're right, because we also have to control our ego, because if one of us makes a mistake, it does not wreck the whole performance. We're just one of the 11. You're not the whole show. So that also, that kind of brings up a good point for me too.
Yeah. And I find too, Joanne, that when you are ringing in an ensemble in handbells, it's often more important to be on time than to play the right bell. That it's better to play the wrong bell loudly and on time than to not play, or to play the right bell but just slightly off time. That actually makes things worse. Yeah. So if you're going to make a mistake, make it loud and proud. And it was a mistake. That's fine. Everyone plays a wrong bell now and again. But if you play it with confidence, then it gives the ringers around you something to work with. But if you kind of allow yourself to be hesitant, that's when things start really going wrong, because everyone is trying to cue off each other, but no one's taking the lead.
Oh, there's nothing worse than a hesitant sound from your choir. Like you just, as a conductor, it's really hard to work with that too. I'm sure, Lynn, you would say, a hesitant, mousy, horrible, semi-late sound, that's the worst. Like you say, play on time. If you got the wrong bell, you can fix that. I worked with a director once who, to save time, I thought it was very clever actually, to save time, he said, every time you make an error, just put your hand up. And that way I know you made an error, so I don't need to go back and worry about it because I know you're going to deal with it. And so I thought, oh, that's very clever. Now this wasn't in bells, this was in a vocal choir, but so it's very interesting because even sometimes the conductor doesn't always know who's making the mistake too, right? Even with bells, sometimes you know that something's going wrong in the treble. You're not 100% sure all the time. In a split second, maybe right at the beginning, exactly who it is, right? So, I mean, you couldn't do this in bells because you need to do this, but it was an interesting concept, I thought, because
our flute teacher uses that. She calls it confessions are good. Yeah, because it saves time. Yeah.
Yeah, well, because
we've had one of our in one of our choirs, there were some people who had come from the high school, and their teacher had taught them to do that, which basically says, we're going to save time by not having to go over it because you realize you've made a mistake, and it's not, oh, I'm so guilty. It's more like, hey, I know I screwed up there.
Exactly. And then as the conductor,
my conductors came up with the best line I ever heard, which is, a wrong note played with confidence is an interpretation.
I like that, Maggie. I like that. I'm going to steal that.
Maggie, I think that's a good line to end on. I'd like to thank you again for being part of this informal part of the Q&A, and hope that you'll join us in 2 weeks' time. We don't have a tutorial next week. It'll be 2 weeks on the 6th of March with Dominique. So have a good rest of the day, everybody. And again,
Thank you all.
so much.
Thanks all. That was good.
It was great.
Thanks, everybody.